Thank you and welcome to all of you who are joining us here today at the Motor Trades Association of Queensland, based at 8 Mile Plains. And for everybody online, welcome. We're really looking forward to today's special presentation, which is part of the arrangement with the government on delivering on the Digital Champions project. And today we're going to be focusing on some key digital areas. In particular, we're going to be talking about online security and data privacy. We're going to be talking about working in the cloud, what is cloud, and customer relationship management and business information systems, and how that can positively influence your business. James Orr, I'm the Chief Technology Innovation Officer here at the Motor Trades Association of Queensland. I've been with the group for a little bit over 6 years now, and throughout that time we've certainly taken a digital journey, and we're still on that digital journey. And in particular, the areas that we're going to be discussing today around security, cloud, and CRM are all areas where we've invested quite heavily. It's an area where we've done a lot of learning, and there's been some really great outcomes in that space for us. In terms of being the leader for industry, we certainly want to take our responsibility seriously in bringing solutions to you and bringing guidance around digital technologies. And today, as a part of this Digital Champions series, we're going to be particularly working on these areas around security and cloud. By the end of today's session, we're really hoping that we can answer these key questions for you. How can you better secure your business and data? And what is it that you need to consider in that space around security and data privacy? How can you leverage the cloud? And even to an extent of what is the cloud? How can it enhance your business, and how can it reduce risk and increase operational certainty and increase your business continuity overall? What challenges do you need to overcome, and what are the things that you need to really consider to adopt cloud? And then how can you implement business information systems, and in particular we're going to talk around CRM, or customer relationship management systems. How can you take advantage of those features within the software that you already use? Or how could you actually adopt a CRM to better improve your business outcomes? Starting off then, we're talking about online security and data privacy, but what is it, and sort of how do you actually approach the area of security? And look, there's two really key areas that you need to focus on as a business owner or a business operator. And that's on the human capital side, which is around security and business culture. You know, how do you take security seriously in your business? How do your employees and staff take it seriously? And we talk about education and awareness in that space, making your employees and staff aware of the risks that exist out there, and how do you address those risks? And part of that is through policy. And there's definitely some other measures that you can take, and we'll discuss those at a high level throughout the presentation today. In that respect, we'll talk about threat management, which is the other side of it. You know, what are the hardware solutions that are in the market, and what approaches can you take, and what are the software-based solutions that can help you navigate online security and data privacy. So to get a bit of a conceptual understanding around what are the things that impact business continuity and security that we all encounter every day. And a big part of that is thinking about, you know, the people in our business and the businesses that we work with, the software products that we use, you know, whether that be cloud or local, and the products and services that we use at a carriage level, you know, whether that's your internet service provider and things like NBN. These all encompass, you know, the areas where you can experience external threats, you can have compromises of your internal systems, and how people play into that configuration, because ultimately it is people that are the last line of defense when it comes to these security concerns that most businesses encounter on a day-to-day basis. And then moreover, there's certainly a lot of practical steps that you can take within your infrastructure and your IT capability that will better posture your business to be more resilient in that space. So with that said, you know, a lot of people ask the question, you know, what is it that you can control? I mean, when you think about technology, there's all these devices and systems that operate both internally and externally. But what is it exactly that's within your control? What can you actually manage, and how does that look? And I guess I'm going to be talking about things from your network back, from what's called a firewall or a router, which is what most of you have deployed within your business, back into your network. What does that look like? And I guess thinking more broadly about what is a network, primarily in business there are sort of two networks, internal and external. Internal being that of the network that all your devices sit on, so that's everything that sits on your Wi-Fi network and all the devices that are connected in through your LAN, including printers and smart devices and security systems that may exist, but usually your desktop endpoints as well that sit behind there. And then you've got your external network, and look, most things on the external network are fairly well out of your control. These are managed by carriage service level providers, whether that be NBN or your ISP, or cloud providers such as Google. Internally, however, you can certainly take certain measures to protect your business better, because you can actually control the ingress and egress of data that is within your control, within your business. But to do that, you really need to get a bit of a conceptual understanding around what is it that you have control over, and how can you actually affect that control. And I guess I want to talk about some practical steps on how to do that from both a hardware and software and policy perspective. And when we think about network level, it's an area that people don't often quite understand. We all understand Wi-Fi and broadband, but quite often these things don't actually make contextual sense. But I guess I just want to kind of break things down to some simplistic terms, and I want to talk about things like the routing device that you generally all have in your business that connects your internal network to the web. That's generally your modem router, and it's quite often supplied by your internet service provider. But there's some certain things that I think we all need to understand. One of them being that predominantly these devices are mass manufactured, and they're certainly sold to lots of different channel partners. And the product that you end up getting is deployed in such a broad way that certainly the footprint of that device out in the public is substantial. And what that does is it creates an appetite for nefarious people and organisations to concentrate their efforts on compromising those devices. Each one of these devices has a username and password. It's a default one set by the manufacturer, and it's all the same. It's printed in the manual. And so most often people who get these routers, it's a modem, it's a box, they plug it in, set and forget. But ultimately it leaves a bit of a hole, because one, you have external threats that potentially could come into your business and access that router and start to manipulate things and compromise your network. But moreover, internally, it can create some dramas where that device could potentially be infected and start logging traffic. It could also open up access to staff to manipulate things as well. But ultimately, it's a real compromise point for your ingress and egress of data within your network. So changing that default username and password is certainly one of the most basic things you can do to start to circumvent those risks. I guess there's an extension of that. If we talk about firewalls, and I sort of mentioned that before, and for those that might not quite be aware, a firewall is usually part of the routing service that runs within that modem router on your network, where your Wi-Fi devices and your computers and printers plug into. And essentially that firewall is a list of rules, of which data can come in, which data can go out. And predominantly when these routers are rolled out, they don't use the most restrictive configuration. So what it does is, that's great for compatibility across a number of devices. However, there's a substantial amount of network ports, as they're called, that don't need to be open and unnecessarily are left open, and potentially, if left unchecked, could become an entry and exit point for information to come in and leave your business. And that could be from network-based attacks. It's not uncommon and certainly not unheard of for devices to actually be compromised on your network. But particularly when computers are compromised and illicit software might be loaded onto those devices, it might be broadcasting information on a specific port that if it was closed would be otherwise able to actually contact its main database or central point of management. So by introducing firewalls, and I don't suspect for a minute that the greater majority of you will understand how to create or even how to deploy specific firewall rules, but it's something that it's worth looking into. And certainly if you have IT support or contractors servicing your business, it's certainly something that you can ask them to investigate for you and potentially go in there and modify those firewall rules to become a lot more restrictive and only really let the kinds of typical traffic in and out of your network over the most common ports. The next, and I guess it kind of bounces on from that default router, is that most often these modem routers that include wireless Wi-Fi capability, again, they operate quite low-level, insecure and unsophisticated access point names or SSIDs and the passwords to access them. Some ISPs do go to some length to create some level of complexity, but quite often these are altered or changed by the business to be simplistic, but these simple passwords can really cause a lot of drama. And when a business gets compromised at a network level and there's no sophisticated monitoring on the network, it could create an ongoing threat that businesses aren't quite aware of. And I guess as a bit of an extension of talking about Wi-Fi password security, quite often businesses offer guest Wi-Fi, but potentially that guest Wi-Fi is actually just the Wi-Fi, the default Wi-Fi that's offered by the router, and essentially you're welcoming customers and their potentially compromised devices onto your network. So where you're running business critical software and services that require the internet, if you're opening up your basic core router function, your basic wireless access to it, that traffic is all sitting together. So again, getting access to that router could then become an issue. People can, manipulate and change those passwords on there and potentially lock you out of your own network, if for no other reason than to be destructive, like any other type of vandalism. So certainly you can purchase, much more sophisticated routing equipment for your business, but ultimately, if you get in there and make some really sound basic changes to the configuration of those network routers that you already have, you can certainly improve the robustness and the security overall. And if you'd like advice on what routers we'd recommend, or the ways that you can secure your business from a network level, we'd certainly be happy to take those questions offline and contextualize them to your business needs. The next sort of area that we'd like to concentrate on when it comes to security, practical security, is at the desktop or laptop level. Quite often people provision these machines in their business with an administrator level account. It's the one account, but essentially this high level of privilege in terms of the actual account itself can manipulate a number of different things within the system. So setting up an administrator account that only a senior member of staff or a business operator has access to, and then a regular standard user level account is one of the best recommendations we can make in that space. Not just for the fact that it separates tools and functions away from users who don't necessarily need it. That could potentially bring those machines down through poor configuration, or installing third-party applications that really should be approved by managers to actually go on the machines. So that way you don't get people's own personal applications just getting loaded on there while they're at work. And it might seem simple. It might be things like music streaming applications or otherwise. But that's not to say that a member of staff might accidentally go to the wrong website, download something that seems like what they should be using, but ultimately it's a malicious form of software. But because they've got an administrator level account, they're actually able to install that software. So by implementing a user and administrator level account on those desktop PCs is actually one of the most simple steps you can take that's actually going to really make a meaningful change to securing your business and your data. This often goes overlooked. Subscribing to a antivirus or internet security system. A lot of people get Windows these days or their Mac PC and they feel fairly well secure in the knowledge that there's a default application, a default security level that's running, and maybe that's good enough. But ultimately these included system functions usually fall significantly short on day zero, which is new attacks that are coming, and also attacks that certainly quite ubiquitous. These sorts of software vendors will come up with a solution or a patch for these potential compromises and issue them quickly to your device. And they're usually a lot more comprehensive. They plug into web browsers, first and third party web browsers. And they can provide level at an email level. There's just a lot more in terms of security that's offered by these third party packages that's not included in the default operating systems that you buy that give you a much greater level of protection. And that comes down to things like also a machine level firewall, but a permissions based threat and proactive threat management system that will sit there looking for things in the system that may potentially be malicious that are going on. And it's just a proactive step you can take. I guess the bookend of the conversation around desktops and PCs, I guess at a high level on a security point of view, is backups and encrypting those backups, because there's no point having a backup that can also be compromised, and there's no way to recover if you are the subject of say a ransomware or a virus that's gone through and disrupted your computer. Well, that's great if you get everything reinstalled again, but how do you go about actually recovering your data? And if your backup gets compromised along with your main storage, then it makes recovery extremely difficult. So one of the best things I can recommend is using an encryption software, even the built-in one to Windows if you're a Windows user, such as BitLocker, can actually go a really long way towards securing your backups, as it actually encrypts the drives at a software level within that tool. And it also means that business critical data can't be just taken off site and plugged into any other machine and accessed. So it restricts the portability of data and gives you that control. But also, if you were to suffer a site loss, which happens as a result of fire or flood, or natural disaster, if you can't get access to that site and you can't get that data, then you can't continue business. Look, and for certain business types, if they lose their site, well, then they lose their ability to operate anyway. However, if you lose your HR data and any other critical business data, well, I mean, that could have repercussions that may make it unrecoverable as a business. So backups are really, really, really big, important area, and taking secure steps around backups is certainly the other side of that coin. And I guess thinking then again around cloud software in general, and services in general. Quite often people use the same password everywhere, and as I look around, I'll see a few guilty parties. Look, I mean, it's one of those things, password management, it's challenging. It's difficult to remember the passwords for different services, and when they become complex, it can make it that much harder. So it's quite often a reason that people don't have a very sophisticated password culture. But it's really critical. I mean, you can't really overstate how important it is to have really complex and strong passwords. And there's so many additional steps that you can take over and above that. One of those is not saving those passwords to the browser. One, people have a tendency to forget, which happens often, and then when they lose their computer for one reason or another, they lose their password, which can be quite an issue. But more importantly, those passwords aren't safeguarded when people are accessing those machines. So ultimately, if you have your internet banking password saved and a staff member gets on there, then they could potentially get access to those business services. Even things like MyGov and those sorts of things, or social networking, which can be its own bear. At the end of the day, not saving your passwords is a basic but often overlooked thing out there, and it's very, very common, but it's certainly something that you need to be aware of, and I definitely suggest you step that back and delete those saved passwords. I guess by extension then around complex passwords, using a different password for every service. I mean, look, we do live in a really connected world now. We're using a number of different services across a number of different vendors, whether that's your Spotify's and your Apple Musics and your Zeros and your MyGovs and your business portals. There's a myriad of different passwords out there. And maintaining the same password for everything is a recipe for disaster, because if it's compromised in one place, it can be compromised in every place. And so it just creates a huge security risk overall. So having a different password for every service is not just advisable, I'd say it's almost critical in today's age, because services do get hacked, and if you're compromised in one place, it could make everything else come undone. So I can see you sort of sitting there and you're mulling this over and trying to make sense of it, and one of the biggest questions is that I can't have multiple passwords, I can't have a strong password, I can't remember it. There's lots of different challenges that are in the way of solid password management. And I guess that there's a couple of things here I want to talk about. One of them is using multi-factor authentication, and the other one's using a service like a password manager. So I guess the first part, multi-factor authentication, what is it? It's a third-party tool or service level mechanism that even when you've got a username or password, you require an additional one-time or short numbered password to implement as a third step. And we quite often see this with different services where you're sent an SMS where you have to validate that you've logged in, and it usually is a 6-character number that's SMS to you, and that's what's called a basic level multi-factor authentication. There's multi-factor authentication tools, software applications that you can download for your PC and your mobile device, and these can actually store these multi-factor codes for every service that you have, and they'll randomly generate a number for every single service. And what that means is that if you're one of those people that's used the same password more than once, if you have multi-factor authentication enabled across all your services, then things like resetting your password for that service or accessing that service make it extremely difficult. Moreover, quite often these multi-factor authentication applications will send out a request, and this request will be a prompt to say, hey, please allow access. So if you haven't been trying to log into something and you get this notification, 1, press deny, 2, you're immediately alerted to the fact that your password's potentially become compromised. So that's kind of a big one that we talk about quite often, even internally, is multi-factor authentication. Where the service offers it, please use it. And then I guess to round it all out, using a product like a password manager, and like I've sort of noted here on the deck, 1Password or LastPass, for example. These types of services are invaluable when you're trying to run a really secure password culture. Not only do these programs store the passwords, unique passwords, they generate really complex passwords for you, up to I think over 100 characters. And what this can enable you to do is have a different, unique and complex password for every service that you use, and the password manager will put them in for you. So there's usually a plugin for your browser and for your phone and for just about every device that you use. And all you need to remember is a significant master password. Once you remember that, it becomes quite easy. And then that application is also encrypted with keys that you get a copy of in the very beginning, and you can go and store them in a secure location. And then on top of that, you can have multi-factor authentication that sits over the top of that. So it can be a very secure layer over layer over layer approach. It's actually really basic to implement. We've rolled it out here. We use password management, we use multi-factor authentication, and every one of our services has a complex password, and that's policy throughout the whole organisation, and that does the most robust job in defending the organisation against potential third-party attempts to hack. I guess jogging on a little bit from security specifically, I want to talk about the cloud. It's something that's thrown around a lot. It's something that people, up in the cloud, what is that? And look, it's a bit of a throwback to, an older type of network topology, similar to a mainframe style of computing where most of the heavy lifting is actually done in the data center. And a data center is just essentially a cold, secured room somewhere with quite a significant and very fast link out of there that enables an organisation to host all their information in one or many data centers that all link up together and provide service to end users like yourselves. And so that's where we get tools like Xero, the business management software. Xero is hosted in a data center, multiple data centers, and you can get access to that product remotely. Same with services like Dropbox or OneDrive or Google Docs. They're all cloud services that are hosted in data centers, multiple data centers, and you get access to them that way. The good thing about cloud is that it's hosted and it's ultimately managed, meaning that you don't have to maintain, update, or secure the data that's on there. These organisations invest heavily at enterprise level grade tools to protect your information and ensure high availability. We talk about high availability, but what is that? All of these data centers are generally multi-tenanted. There are obviously a few data centers out there by some of your, very, very large organisations that are there for their sole purpose. Thinking Microsoft, Amazon, Google, those types of organisations. But for example, Netflix stores a lot of their video library inside Amazon data centers. So for example, Netflix is a customer of Amazon, for example. And in that configuration, data is aggregated worldwide across the network of storage hosts, and users can get access to, the closest one to where they're located. And what it's done, with cloud is it's brought the advent of software as a service or subscription. Subscription is the new way of accessing and licensing software. It's, it's existed for quite a long time, but now it's ubiquitous and it is the primary driver of software licensing because it gives a very low entry point in terms of price to a very large suite of products, but it ties you in. Ultimately, you need to maintain that subscription to maintain access to your data and access to those services. So it's an ongoing process. I guess, when you think about it, you're like trying to make sense of, how does this all sort of come together? How does it work? What sits where? How do you make sense of it? And look, I think it's probably just best broken down into sort of 3 stages. You have your cloud provider, in their data centers, and then your data travels over a public network for the most part, unless you're paying for private backhaul links, which probably unlikely for anyone in this room, but you know, for the most part, your data travels over a public carriage service. So, for example, think NBN or your retail service provider, Telstra or otherwise, public DNS services, and different routing networks. And this all comes back to your data that you're hosting. So this is where all your employees and customers and devices and all that data is stored on your side. And these services are constantly traveling over the public network to these cloud providers. So if you think about your printers that are seeking updates on your network, or your PCs that are getting Windows updates or Mac updates, or your tablet devices that are getting updates and constant feeds from different service providers, it's all traveling from these data centers over your public network to your device. And I think that has a lot of people scared and confused, because your data is traveling over this big public network. But for the most part, where it counts, your data is traveling over a secure layer. It can't be decrypted on the fly. And the way it works is that when you send data, it's encrypted, and when it gets to the other end, it's decrypted where you intended it to be sent. So for example, when you're accessing your data over at Microsoft, if you're an Office 365 subscriber, only you and that service can see what it is that you're doing. Third-party networks can see that you're connecting to Office 365, but they can't see what you're doing. They can't get into that granular level, and that's provided by the encryption layer that runs over that carriage. So, when we're sending our data over the internet, just like internet banking, it's the same deal, is ultimately it's secured at a transmission level. I think that's probably the biggest thing to remember, and one of the most important things to remember. I think it gives people, small business owners particularly, the most anxiety around that data. Where's it going? Who can see it? Who can access it? You want to protect your customers' information, and you want to make sure you're doing the right thing. But I think as you understand the complexities that are required to run those services, secure and data privacy is it's premium. It comes as a premium. Reputation is key. So it's certainly the goal for all these organisations to offer a very high level secure service. So when you transmit that data, it's transferred over an encrypted secure layer. I guess I want to talk a little bit more about those cloud services. And I sort of mentioned before that things have moved towards a subscription-based access, where you pay a nominal fee every month or annually to access these services. Benefits being there, it's a platform that's constantly evolving. You don't need to worry about buying this version and then in a year's time it's superseded. As you continue to pay and the product evolves, you continue to get access to the latest version of that product. And that's one of the biggest advantages. Quite often, you invest in a piece of software or a license, and that's great. It's as good as the day you buy it. But when you buy into a subscription cloud service, it's always going to be in its best state. It's always constantly developed on, updates are always coming, and it's an evolving platform. And quite often you get access to increased features over time. And there's usually a benefit for going cloud, and if I think about a couple of products out there to sort of demonstrate where some of that value can be, and I'm not paid by any of these organisations at all, but for example, you think about the Microsoft Office suite of products. You can buy a singular, perpetual license, as it's called, and you can get access to, for example, Office 2019, and for that you get access to the product, for the life of the installation. But apart from security updates and maybe some, minor feature enhancements, you don't get access to any of the collaboration tools that come as a part of, a 365 subscription. You don't get access to things like OneDrive, where you get a terabyte of online storage. And certainly when the new version comes out, you've got to pay to upgrade. Look, and I think, I think it's a product for everybody in the market, but when you think about the benefits of cloud, is that it's a continually evolving platform that has a lot of rich collaboration features generally, but moreover, at the end of the day, you're always going to get the product in its best state, its continually evolving state. And it's not just software, and like I just mentioned, storage, but software and storage are probably the two key areas. And you think about cloud storage, OneDrive, Google Drive, and Dropbox. These tools, they're kind of like the USB in the sky. It's the thing you don't need to take with you. You can access it from wherever you can get access to internet, but it is internet dependent. I think that's probably one of the biggest caveats when it comes to cloud, is that it requires connectivity. I mean, it's essential. It doesn't operate without it. Whereas if you license a product or service on a machine, it'll operate and run locally on that machine. And if you put that data on a USB, then you just plug it into another machine and off you go. So when you think about cloud, it's certainly very much about buying into an ecosystem of products, and that's generally kind of the way it works. Whether you're a creator, whether you're in business productivity, whether this software to manage your business, at the end of the day, all of these products are being served to you at a price point that's highly affordable and feature rich, but does require that ongoing subscription, and can lock you into an ecosystem of products or tools that can make it difficult for you to sort of move away. But look, I mean, that's like most things, right? It's designed to keep you into an ecosystem. For example, when you buy a phone or you buy into a tablet, traditionally when you buy into an operating system, you tend to invest in that application network and the benefits of it. You might wrap your backup systems around the products that are in those services, and so I think it's probably careful to remain conscious about cloud, that things that you invest in or paths that you go down may make it very difficult for you to leave down the road. But I think most cloud providers are pretty keen to get your business, so they offer tools and services to help you move away. But when you build policy and procedure over the top of those services, those are the things that make it very difficult to sort of move away. But I think the benefits certainly outweigh the risks, and I think this probably leads us naturally into the next area of discussion. Let's think about those benefits and the potential risks around cloud. I mean, I don't want to get into a conversation particularly around which is better. I think I just really want to concentrate on, what are the risks and what are the rewards of cloud, as opposed to saying, cloud or no cloud. I think, it's really up to people to make a decision around what's the right fit for you. We certainly are great users of cloud, and we certainly support moving down that direction, but it may not be a perfect fit for you and your circumstances, in your business, or with your fiscal constraints. So it's not for everybody, but I think the more information you have to arm yourself with making that decision over which way you go, hopefully some of this beds in with you and assists you on that journey of consideration. Let's think about the risks. Let's talk about the things that you need to consider when you're moving to the cloud, because it's great to talk about the benefits, but if you don't address the potential risks and take into account all the potential challenges in that space, then it's hard to say, yep, let's just dive deep into the cloud. I sort of spoke about it in the beginning, security and data privacy. Look, at the end of the day, your data is being stored with everyone else's data, and so with that comes some risks. One, it's a big target for attackers and hackers. So these organisations invest significant effort on trying to compromise these services, and if they do compromise the service, your data or your customers' data could potentially become unstuck. And again, coming from that, I spoke before around password management. If a service is compromised, then they can actually retrieve a version of your password. That password could potentially be sold to some of the darker places on the internet, and if that password is used repetitiously across all the services that you use, that could create a big risk for you and your customers where your data is concerned. Data control and ownership. Look, I mean, it really depends on the type of industry that you're operating in, but ultimately control over your data and the responsibility of your data. So things like, keeping your data for 7 years, maintaining access to that data, and serving it to your customers, and ownership of that data. I mean, it's often said it needs to be a consideration for certain industries when it comes to things like data sovereignty. When you think about data sovereignty, most of the software that we consume, when you go to cloud, is generally made by overseas organisations or overseas-based organisations. And you think about all the large ones, such as your Googles, your Microsoft, your Amazons, and so forth. They're generally foreign-owned, and they have points of presence in Australia, but your data could potentially be, stored overseas. And so when that's the case, then your data is subject to the local laws of where it's stored. So, the Patriot Act is, often one that's discussed, which is, in the United States, that potentially your data being stored in the US could be read or accessed by United States legal enforcement. And, you might say that's not too bad, but it might actually be against compliance for any third party to be able to access that data under whatever arrangements you have in your business. So, it may compromise your ability to deliver on the things that you're required to under law. And with that said, it sort of blends quite easily into, user management. That's another big thing, because, these cloud services, you can create user accounts rather quickly, but managing those user accounts when staff leave, when they leave the building, they can access the data. But moreover, when they leave the organisation, if you don't terminate access, again, that can create a big security risk, because it's not like they need to turn up to work to get access to the business information systems that you use. So whether that's the email or the files or access to your customer history, those sorts of things, if they're all cloud stored, if they've still got access to their account, they've still got access to get into your data. So user management becomes, quite a significant ongoing risk management strategy for businesses. But if you stay on top of it, if it's a part of your HR onboarding and exiting process, then ultimately it's quite easy to manage, but it's something that's easily overlooked as well. Notwithstanding, if you do leave the subscriptions running, you're up for the ongoing cost of maintaining that user account if that cloud subscription is per user, which many of them are. And I mentioned it before, but it's certainly a risk, is connectivity requirement. At the end of the day, these services require a decent level of broadband. So whether that's fixed or wireless, then certainly fixed is best if it's possible. But for those of you that operate in regional areas that don't have access to that high-speed data infrastructure, which I know a few of you joining us today, that's the case in the regional areas. It certainly creates a risk. If you can't get a quality service, then you can't get quality access to that software. And it's totally out of the control of the provider. It becomes a carrier level issue. So when I was talking before around the vendor and the carriage, the public carriage in the middle, that can get in the way of getting access to these cloud services. And it means if it worked for you today, if you moved your business to another location that was less equipped with infrastructure, you may very well lose, high quality access to the systems that you use. So it becomes an ongoing business risk to make sure that, wherever you are positioned or wherever you're going, that you have access to, secure and reliable internet access. And I guess, all these things are fairly high level, but ultimately they're really key considerations that you need to make in order to determine whether or not cloud's right for you. And even if it is right for you, you need to make sure that you implement the right strategies and policies and plans to support the healthy use and ongoing use of those services. Risks are one thing, and I think that's, they're one of the most important things to weigh up. But the benefits are certainly an area that I love to talk about. It's the fun stuff, and I think as an IT person, particularly, high availability is one of the biggest boons for moving to cloud. Predominantly these services are co-located or geolocated with multiple sites. So if you get failover in Brisbane, it can seamlessly take over out of Melbourne or Sydney or Perth. Perth might introduce a little bit of latency, but ultimately you get continuity of service. If there's a major weather event, flood or otherwise, and the local data center is compromised or the fiber's cut or any number of different things, they can quite often be inconsequential to you, to the cloud or vendor. It might be a big deal, but generally your services will cut straight over to the nearest data center to you, and you can continue business as usual. And there might be some slight performance degradation depending on the circumstance, but ultimately it's one of the greatest benefits of moving down that road. The next one I think is, it's quite popular, especially for large organisations, but it works at scale as well, is reduced cost and increased operational fiscal certainty. So when we think about that, we think about, what you're going to pay, what it costs, it can scale, and scale really easily. And what I mean by that is that, the old approach to technology is that we, generally over-engineered. As a business, you would, buy the best performing hardware that you could buy at the time that was, affordable for your business, that gave you the most, breadth if your business grew. Because no one wants to go and reinvest in IT equipment midway through its life cycle. But with cloud, you pay the subscription fee, and as your business grows and scales, it's just add another user, add another user. You don't need to consider the hardware or the support or the licensing model that you're on, unless you get up to significantly large numbers, because the service is already built at that scale. So it's designed to have thousands of users. So you might only be having 3 or 4, but it can easily do 10 or 20. Whereas if you do invest in equipment, potentially it might run out of puff, once you get to 10 users. So definitely the huge benefit there around reduced operating costs, so reduced investment up front, and it gives you a bit of surety around your IT spend. And I guess, hand in hand with that is much reduced risk of failure. Like I said to you before, when you think about high availability, but what comes hand in hand with that is that, these organisations are generally investing in enterprise level gear that you would otherwise not be able to get access to. Server level, high performance hardware components that you're completely obfuscated from. You can't see it, you don't need to see it, you don't need to manage it. But it's such a significant enterprise level difference as to what you would implement yourself. There's much less risk of failure, much higher performance per dollar per watt, but ultimately these organisations are managing that risk. They have multiple redundancies. They invest in, for every one server that they deploy in production, they might have 2, 3, 4, 5 backup servers, and then a copy of your data in 3 or more data centers to give you that high availability. So much less reduced risk of failure. So it's a huge benefit of moving down that road. With that comes performance. Like I said to you before, you get access to this high quality enterprise gear that enables you to quickly scale up the type of performance you need. If you were to actually invest in hosting your server, if you needed to host your server up in the cloud, for example, you could start off with a certain configuration, and then at a click of a button, you can upgrade or downgrade or completely change the type of server that you need and use as you need it, so you can get access to that immediate performance. But when you subscribe to a platform and think all those major software vendors that you use, that you're subscribing to, the level of performance that you can get off of that service as opposed to something you could potentially implement, there's certainly a disparity, and the cloud version is quite often the most robust and the fastest and the best performing, and ultimately the most feature rich generally as a result of that. And it becomes a complete minor risk in terms of management for the business. It certainly reduces your risk exposure. It introduces some additional risks that you need to manage, but all those traditional risks that people and organisations would have had to manage, from all of the above areas that we've discussed, that risk management layer certainly reduces, and ultimately, you can get on with doing business as opposed to managing technology so much. I guess, jogging on a little bit more, I'm certainly conscious of time. Look, there's a lot of information that's been covered today already, but we don't want to go too deep, so we're going to try and cover off all the areas. And the last area that we're going to talk about was customer relationship management systems, or CRM. A lot of you might use CRMs existing. You may not be aware that you are using a CRM. You may not know how to leverage CRM. But I guess I wanted to talk about some of the key tenets of and benefits of using a CRM, or using the CRM features that are available in software that you're already using. For example, CRMs store basic accounts and contacts, but key account information, biographical information around a business that can be usually a little bit more robust than a standard accounting package, for example. You can log all your customer interactions, not just sales and invoicing, but calls, leads, opportunities, all the sorts of things that build up to a successful conversion of business and ongoing management of the relationship. You can automate future contact. This is a big one. Especially if you've got a lot of customers, remembering when to call them back, when their next interaction's due, when their products might be up for renewal, any of those sorts of facets, you can have them automated in the system to prompt you, automatically email clients, automatically schedule appointments, and send things like SMS, follow-up SMS. How was our service? Or following up with, here's a copy of your invoice. There's a myriad of things that you can implement from a CRM. It's just knowing that these features are available to you. Another one is tracking the success of your promotion. So if you're running a campaign, social media or otherwise, how do you track those conversions? I mean, generally you get analytics, but that's one side of the coin. The other side is the business metrics. How did those leads or those new clients coming in, how did that convert to business? Is it a sustainable marketing model that you're using? Was that campaign effective? It might be effective when you see the reports around that social media campaign you ran, or that advertising campaign that you ran, but did it actually convert? How well is your business performing before and after? And how many of those were organic business versus what you actually attracted through that campaign? And these are all things that can be derived through a CRM package when you tie it all together properly. Managing team performance. This is a big one. Bringing transparency to the customer process, really understanding, who are your high performing people, and then how do you coach the people that may be underperforming through to success. And having a proper team management component within a CRM can be really empowering for a business owner. It can open up opportunities to reward those that need it, to incentivize those who need that. There's just a myriad of different tools around performance management, to help manage things like KPIs through all the interactions. You can tag a sale to a specific salesperson, and track those things all the way from the original deal through to conclusion. And then ultimately, what you do want to be able to leverage out of a CRM is to drive new business initiatives. How do you create those incentives and those referral and those loyalty programs that drive organic, repetitive business? And a CRM can certainly enable you to drive those outcomes and those campaigns through the tools that are in there. I always talk about CRM, but contextualizing it, understanding, what is a CRM and what might you be using that already has CRM functionality. I've just sort of cherry-picked a few programs that are out there in the space, some stuff from our industry, but even more broadly, we think about products like Reckon, QuickBooks, Myo, Microsoft Dynamics CRM, Salesforce, Xero, Pentana, Dealer Solutions. These are all CRMs that can provide insight into your business. For the small business, users, your Reckon, your QuickBooks, your Xero, your Myo type of products. Generally, these all have CRM functionality. It might be basic CRM functionality, but quite often they offer extension subscriptions or plugins or modules that allow you to extend that CRM functionality to fulfill those objectives that I spoke about on the last slide there. But you might already be using these software packages to run your business, your accounts, your profit and loss, your HR payroll, your wages. But quite often when you look a bit deeper into these products that you're already using, you can find that they have a deeper customer relationship management component that you can access usually within the same price point. It might be a subscription you're already on, but you're not quite taking advantage of. So I just encourage you to sort of go back and have a look at the systems that you're already using, and do they already have these features, and start to take advantage, start to leverage these features. And if your product that you're using doesn't have it, it might be an opportunity for you to go and look at something else in the market that's competing better for your dollar. Look, and I think, really into, I guess, the bookend of our chat today around your digital journey. So MTA Queensland is, one of the key supporters in the Digital Champions program rollout on behalf of the government. If you've got any additional questions around all the topics that we've spoken about today, and I understand that we've certainly touched on a lot. There's a lot there to digest, and I encourage you to go back and listen to the recording, which we'll publish online at the end of this session. And certainly if there are any questions, our team are more than willing and ready to take your call or answer your email, or give you specific digital advice as appropriate. And I just want to thank you all for lasting to the end of this presentation. I know it's been a long one, but I really hope that you've gotten a lot out of this. And we certainly encourage you to go off and have some digital success on the back of this. And thank you very much for all your time and taking the time to come down here today. We'll see you for the next presentation. Cheers.